Welcome to The Explainer. You know, when we think about history, our minds usually jump straight to the big stuff, right? Grand battles, sweeping political speeches, massive social movements. But so much of human history, the gritty, day-to-day reality of how systems actually operated and whether people lived or died, is hiding in the most mundane places imaginable. Yep, we're talking about administrative paperwork. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and honestly pretty chilling historical artifact from 1895. We're going to look right past the faded paper and elegant handwriting to decode the grim realities buried in the neat rows and columns of a colonial prison ledger. Let's get into it.
Think about this for a second. How does a massive, sprawling bureaucracy actually measure the human toll of its prisons? When human suffering and literal mortality are processed by a giant state machine, what does that actually look like? Well, it doesn't look like a tragedy. It looks like a monthly return. It's just daily paperwork, ledgers, and administrative compliance. By boiling the end of a human life down to a simple tally mark on a standardized grid, a system can process mortality without ever having to confront the actual humanity of the dead.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our primary artifact for today. And I know, at first glance it looks incredibly boring, right? It's just a simple cover letter, Circular No. 6 of 1895. It was issued from the Inspector General of Prisons for the Northwestern Provinces and Oud and sent out to all the jail superintendents. It is an administrative memo, pure and simple. But when we look a little closer at what this memo is actually demanding, well, the bureaucratic veil really starts to lift.
Look at these opening lines. They are so deeply, almost absurdly polite. It reads, Inspector General has the honor to forward herewith 6 copies of revised forms. It's so formal. The guy who signed it, Surgeon Lt. Colonel Geoffrey C. Hall, is using language that is just perfectly tailored for the upper crust of 19th century colonial administration. He literally has the honor to forward these forms. But there is just this massive, stark contrast between his highly civilized language and the incredibly dark reality of what these forms are actually tracking.
There's also this very distinct administrative urgency hiding right beneath that polite tone. Let's trace the timeline he lays out in paragraphs 2 and 3. Back in January of 1894, an older version of this paperwork, Form 7, had been prescribed. Fast forward to June 1895, and that old form is officially canceled. But as we know, the bureaucracy absolutely cannot have gaps in its data. So, Surgeon Lt. Colonel Hall orders his superintendents to retroactively prepare and submit the new revised forms for January, February, March, April, and May of 1895. And he wants them submitted to his office, quote, at an early date. The state machine demands its data, and it demands it right now, even if that means redoing all the morbid accounting for the past 5 months.
But turning to the second page strips away that polite facade completely. This right here is what Surgeon Lieutenant Colonel Hall had the honor to forward, revised forms number 7 and number 8. And right at the top of each page we see exactly what the state is after. Statement showing the mortality among the convicts. Death. This entire administrative exercise, the urgent memos, the retroactive paperwork, it's all just designed to standardize how superintendents report the deaths of their inmates every single month.
Now, what's really interesting about this is, why did the administration need 2 completely separate statements for the exact same dead prisoners? If you look at the distinction in the headers, it tells a story. Form 7 tracks mortality according to the length of the convict's original sentence. Form 8, sitting right beneath it, tracks mortality according to the length of time passed in jail. The state is basically utilizing 2 distinct, parallel perspectives here. One views the prisoner purely through the lens of the judicial system, and the other views them through the grim reality of their physical confinement.
So, breaking down Form 7, we can see exactly how the administration categorized mortality based on a judge's specific judicial sentence. We've got brackets starting from not exceeding 6 months and then stepping all the way up to anyone slapped with a sentence above 7 years. The bureaucracy essentially wanted to figure out, are the people dying the ones who committed minor infractions with short sentences, or are they the long-term heavily sentenced convicts?
When we look at these side by side, we realize that just answering the judicial question wasn't nearly enough for them. Imagine being the superintendent, sitting in the jail office at the end of the month, which is where these had to be signed. You couldn't just tally the dead once and call it a day. No, you had to manually cross-reference your ledgers. First, you sort the dead by the judge's sentence for Form 7. Then you have to take that exact same list of the deceased and resort it based on how many days they actually managed to survive inside your walls for Form 8. It's an incredibly heavy administrative burden, and it really highlights their intense desire for very, very specific data.
The crucial difference really emerges when we check out the time brackets for Form 8. Notice how the categories shift slightly from Form 7? Instead of a massive 3-year jump, it goes above 1 year to 2 years, and then 2 to 3 years. This gave the Inspector General a micro view into the physical toll of the prison environment over consecutive years. They're essentially tracking, does the prison kill you in year 2, or do you somehow adapt and survive until year 5?
And the granularity of this data? It's honestly staggering. For every single one of those time brackets, whether by sentence or by time served, the superintendent had to track highly specific metrics. They had to break it all down by sex, male, female, and total. And within those rows, they had to record the number on last day of the month directly next to the deaths. Just picture that visual on the ledger for a second. The living population, counted on the very last day of the month, recorded side by side with the tally of those who didn't make it to the end.
This brilliantly illustrates the stark reality of 19th century colonial data collection. It is the absolute, cold quantification of human mortality. Think about what's missing here. There is literally no space on these forms for the cause of death. No space for names, for stories, for disease outbreaks, or systemic abuses. It's only the grid. Life and death are distilled down into a ratio, just to ensure the gears of the colonial administration kept turning. They were fully informed by the math of their mortality rates, but entirely divorced from the tragedy of them.
Which brings us to the most important question of all, and one that this ledger unfortunately can never answer for us. Who were the men and women reduced to tick marks in the deaths column at the end of every month in the northwestern provinces and Odd? You know, when we decode artifacts like these, we unlock the framework of history, but the human souls trapped inside that framework remain totally silent. So, what do you think it would take to uncover the actual stories of the people who populated these bureaucratic grids? It's definitely a question worth exploring, and I really hope this explainer leaves you wanting to find out more.